December 1968, New York. A CBS studio that smells of hot lights and cold coffee. 3 minutes before going live, the journalist leans in and lowers his voice. "Mr. Cash, our producers think your music is too dark for a family audience. Maybe tonight. You soften it." Johnny Cash doesn't answer right away. He wipes his palms on black denim. His hands are shaking, not from nerves. Amphetamines, swallowed an hour ago, are burning through his blood. He hasn't slept in 72 hours. His heart is racing ahead of his thoughts. Behind the cameras stands June Carter, the last person who hasn't given up on him. She doesn't know that this morning he stole $200 from her purse to buy more pills. The red light is about to turn on. Rather waits. Cash looks him straight in the eye and says something that will make the reporter walk off the set before the interview is over. But that moment isn't the real story. Because what happens in the next 48 hours will pull Cash to the edge of collapse and force him to make a promise that cannot be taken back. In 9 days, Johnny Cash is scheduled to sing inside a prison. And before he ever steps on that stage, everything he has left will be tested. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The studio lights were hotter than any stage. They baked through his black suit, turned the makeup on his face into a thin, tired mask. Across from him, Dan Rather held his cards like a shield and tried to steer the segment back toward safe ground. Charts, a comeback, the neat story of a man who sang for prisoners and walked away clean. Johnny Cash didn't play along. Rather asked about the darkness in his songs, smiling as if it were a branding question. Cash stared into the lens, pupils wide, a damp shine at his hairline. His hands trembled on the armrests. He pressed his palms down as if he could pin the shaking to the chair. "Darkness is where real people live," he said, voice low, too calm. "You want light? Go to Disneyland." A few people behind the cameras stiffened. A producer's pen stopped scratching. Cash kept going, not looking at Rather anymore, talking past him, about men inside Folsom State Prison who wouldn't see their kids grow, about wives who sat at kitchen tables with letters they read until the paper thinned, about the sound a cell door makes when it kills the day. It wasn't a performance. It was a confession with the volume turned down. Rather's cheeks colored. He tried a pivot, a softer question, but Cash's answers dragged every sentence back to the same place. Families waiting, time wasted, shame that didn't end at the gate. Someone off camera flashed a hand signal. The floor manager's smile tightened. At 8 minutes, the segment ended. Abrupt, polite words over a man who was still mid-thought. The red tally light clicked off. The room exhaled. Cash didn't. He blinked once, as if he'd forgotten where he was, and then his body folded forward. Not dramatic, just a sudden surrender, weight dropping out of him. A chair leg scraped. Someone said his name too loudly. June Carter Cash was already moving. She didn't shout, didn't ask permission. One hand under his arm, the other on his shoulder, her face set in a practiced calm that fooled nobody. "Back way," she told a producer, and it wasn't a request. They got him through a corridor that smelled of cigarette smoke and floor wax, out a service door, into night air sharp enough to sting. Hours later, in a room at the Plaza Hotel, the city hummed behind thick glass. At 3 a.m., he woke with a dry mouth and a heart that felt too fast for his ribs. June sat in a chair near the bed, shoes still on, eyes open like she'd been holding the room together by refusing to sleep. On the carpet beside the bed were empty blister packs, silver backs peeled bare, the little plastic bubbles crushed. His supplies, found and counted. He tried to sit up. The mattress creaked. Sweat cooled on his skin. June didn't raise her voice. She just spoke like a woman reading a date from a calendar. "Johnny," she said, "in 9 days you're supposed to sing at Folsom. You promised those men." He swallowed, shame and nausea climbing together. The words came out rough. "I took money," he admitted. "From you." Her eyes shone, but she didn't wipe them. "I know," she said, and for the first time he heard something like grief under her control. Then, quieter. "I always leave it where you'll find it. Because if it isn't me, you'll go to someone worse." The confession landed wrong, like a mercy that hurt. He understood the logic instantly. Feed the hunger just enough to keep him from chasing it into an alley. Love turned into strategy, because panic had been useless. At 4 a.m. the phone rang. Not the gentle ring of a house line. This was louder, edged with static, as if the call had been dragged across state lines by force. June grabbed it first. A man's voice, tight and official. "Mrs. Cash? This is Sheriff Warren Matthews. We've got a problem." June's grip whitened. "He's not in any—" Cash took the receiver from her hand, slowly, like a man lifting something that could burn him. "Talk," he said. "An inmate's got an officer," Matthews replied. "Hostage. He says he'll let him go only if he speaks to you." Somewhere behind the sheriff's words, faint but unmistakable, a man sobbed. Short, terrified sounds, as if he was trying not to make the wrong kind of noise. Cash closed his eyes. In the dark room, June held a small tape recorder without being told, her fingers unsteady around the metal body. Then a new voice came on the line. Young, educated, cracked at the edges, like glass under pressure. "Mr. Cash," the inmate said, "I wrote a song for you." Cash could hear breath, movement, a close, dangerous intimacy. "What's your name?" "Glenn Shirley," the voice said. "And I need you to hear it before I do something I can't take back." The line crackled, as if the wire itself were afraid. Somewhere far away, metal echoed. Keys, a door, a shout cut short. Then the voice came back, closer now, breathing hard. Glenn held the knife against the guard's throat, with a hand that shook just enough to matter. Harold Peterson was 54, gray at the temples, a father who'd promised his youngest he'd be home by dinner. He was crying without sound, tears sliding sideways as he tried not to move. "I don't want to hurt him," Glenn said quickly, like a man correcting a misunderstanding before it turned fatal. "I just need you to listen." Johnny leaned against the hotel dresser, bare feet on cold carpet, the receiver slick with sweat in his hand. His heart hammered, but his head, strangely, was clear. Adrenaline had burned through the fog. "I'm listening," he said. "Go on." Glenn didn't speak at first. Then, softly, uncertainly, he began to sing. The melody crept through the static in pieces, fragile, almost apologetic. 4 lines in, Johnny felt it, an old pull in his chest, something learned before words mattered. He straightened, his free hand curled into a fist. It wasn't just a song. It was a shape he knew. He whispered June's name without covering the receiver. She leaned closer, eyes searching his face. He mouthed, "Mama used to sing this." The tune was a reworking of an old gospel hymn, one his mother had carried through the house when he was small, when evenings smelled of wood dust and boiled coffee. Glenn couldn't have known that. No one outside that kitchen had ever heard her hum it the way she did. The singing stopped. In the silence, Harold sobbed once, loud now. Johnny spoke carefully. "That song," he said. "Where did you learn it?" "I didn't," Glenn replied. "It just came. In the chapel. Gray stone walls. I called it Greystone Chapel. Johnny closed his eyes, and the hotel room fell away. He was 12 again, standing in Arkansas heat that pressed like a hand on his back. Sawdust hung in the air, sweet and sharp. Someone was screaming. His mother, maybe. Or maybe it was the machine tearing through wood and bone. Later, there was a coffin, pine-scented and wrong. His brother's hand was cold when he touched it, too small for a man who'd been bigger than him in every way that counted. At the funeral, his mother sang through tears she refused to wipe. His father stood drunk, jaw tight, eyes full of something meaner than grief. "Why not you?" The words had landed like a sentence, and Johnny had carried them ever since. June watched his face pale, watched the past rush back into him. Quietly, so Glenn wouldn't hear, she said what Johnny had never said out loud, that he'd spent his life trying to pay a debt no one asked for. That guilt had been the engine under every mile, every song, every pill. On the line, Glenn was talking again, faster now, the dam breaking. He told them about the robbery, not a bank, not a store, but a hospital pharmacy. Morphine. For his wife. She'd been dying, screaming through nights the doctors wouldn't soften. He hadn't wanted money. He'd wanted mercy. "She died while I was locked up," he said, voice thinning. "They buried her without me. I don't even know where." Johnny felt the room tilt. Two men, miles apart, both late to a grave. "I don't want to kill Harold," Glenn said. "I just want someone to hear my song, before I'm done." Johnny didn't hesitate. "Sing it again," he said. "All of it." June hit the recorder. The reels began to turn. Glenn sang 4 verses this time. His voice wavered, then steadied. The knife lowered a fraction. Harold's breathing slowed. Somewhere, a guard shouted orders that went unanswered. When it ended, Johnny spoke into the quiet like a vow. "In 9 days," he said, "I'm singing at Folsom. I'll open with your song, in front of everyone." A laugh, sharp and unbelieving. "You won't remember this. You won't remember me." Johnny turned so June could hear him clearly. "You getting this?" he asked. Her hand shook, but the tape kept rolling. Harold was released minutes later. The phone clicked dead after Glenn's last words, soft, almost hopeful. Maybe my life meant something. June lowered the recorder. "Johnny," she said, fear breaking through at last, "you can barely stand. How are you going to keep that promise?" Johnny stared at the silent phone. For the first time in days, he didn't reach for anything to dull the answer. The plane lifted out of New York before dawn, the city dissolving into a gray quilt beneath the wing. Johnny sat rigid in his seat, hands clenched on his thighs, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt despite the cabin's cold air. Whatever was left of the pills was gone now. His body knew it. Every muscle twitched as if arguing with his bones. June watched him without staring. Halfway through the flight she said it, calm and final. "I called your mother. She's waiting for us." He didn't answer. His jaw worked, teeth grinding softly, the way they did when pain came in waves. They landed in Nashville to winter light, and a silence that felt too open. Carrie Cash stood in the doorway of her small house, straight-backed, gray hair pulled tight, eyes sharp with something older than anger. She didn't hug her son. "You'll sleep in my room," she said, "every night, like when you were 8. That was the plan. No discussion. The first night was violence without witnesses. Johnny vomited until there was nothing left to give, then dry heaved until his ribs screamed. His hands shook so hard he bit down on a towel to keep from breaking teeth. Shadows crawled along the walls, bent into shapes that breathed. Carrie sat in her chair, and read the Bible aloud, her voice steady, relentless, filling the room like a metronome. The second night was worse. Sometime before morning, Johnny broke. He screamed the question he'd swallowed for 24 years, the one that always waited under everything. "Why didn't you let me die instead of Jack?" Carrie didn't flinch. She closed the book. Her answer came slow, deliberate, as if she'd practiced it in secret. "Because Jack was already an angel, and you had to learn how to become one." Then, softer, Jack had told her, just before the accident, that Johnny would be something big, that he'd need watching. By the third day, Johnny could stand. Not well, but upright. They drove him to the studio where the Tennessee Three waited. Marshall Grant took one look at him and said what everyone was thinking. "You look dead. Cancel the show." Johnny said nothing. He set a small cassette recorder on the piano and pressed play. Glenn's voice filled the room, thin and haunted. Greystone Chapel. Silence followed. "We learned this," Johnny said. 6 days. Luther Perkins shook his head. "We don't have chords. We don't have time." "He had a knife at a man's throat," Johnny replied. "He sang it once." No one argued after that. On the fourth day, Bob Johnston walked in with news that landed like a slap. CBS was out. Too risky. Too toxic after the interview. But Johnston wasn't empty-handed. He'd brought portable recording gear, reels and cables like a lifeline. "To hell with television," he said. "We'll make a live album." Johnny looked at the machine, then at his hands. "And if I fall apart?" Johnston shrugged. "Then we'll record that too." That night the phone rang again. Sheriff Matthews's voice was tight. Glenn had attacked another inmate, broken jaw, mocked for the song, now in isolation. "If he acts again," Matthews said, "he won't hear you sing." Johnny asked for the line. Glenn sounded smaller this time, ashamed. "I ruined it." 5 days, Johnny told him. "You hold on for 5. I'm holding on for you." Later, in bed, Johnny stared at the ceiling, sleep refusing him. June lay beside him, quiet. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a breath. "Are you scared?" He swallowed. "I'm scared I'll see my brother out there." "Standing with the prisoners." June turned toward him in the dark. "Then maybe that's why you have to go." Johnny woke choking on the image of a rope cutting into skin that wasn't there. In the dream, Glenn stood on a stool that tipped too easily, his shadow stretching up the wall like an accusation. Johnny came out of sleep gasping, heart racing, sheets damp with sweat. June was already sitting up. "Someone left a package," she said. 5 this morning. It lay on the kitchen table like a dare. Inside, amphetamines, neatly packed. Enough to smooth the edges, enough to lie to his body for a week. A note, handwritten, careful. "You won't make it without these. We both know it. Your friend." June reached for the trash. Johnny stopped her. He slid the package into his jacket pocket with a movement too quick to argue with. "I'll throw them out," he said. The words sounded right. His eyes didn't. At the studio later that morning, the music fell apart. Luther missed changes he'd played for years. Strings buzzed. Marshall cut the sound. Luther's face collapsed. He told them his wife was leaving, that she said he loved Johnny more than his family, that this prison show was ego dressed as mercy. Johnny didn't raise his voice. "If you want to stay home," he said, "do it." Luther stared at the floor. "I'm going," he muttered, "but not for you. For the guy who wrote that song." That evening, a black Cadillac idled outside the house. Saul Holiff stepped out with contracts and a newspaper folded like a weapon. The headline cut clean. From hero to has-been. The article painted obsession as sickness, empathy as pathology. Holliff urged him to cancel. Save the brand. Save himself. Johnny listened without interrupting. When Holliff left, the house felt hollow. He locked himself in the bathroom. The pills sat on the counter, white and patient. 15 minutes passed with nothing but the hum of the light and the sound of his own breath. Then the door opened. June stood there, having waited the entire time. He handed her the package. "I wanted to," he said. "God help me, I wanted to." She broke then. Told him about her first love dying in her arms from an overdose. Told him she hadn't married Johnny despite the darkness, but because she believed, maybe foolishly, that this time she couldn't carry him. Only he could. The next day blurred into motion. Airports, buses, the long pull west. On the plane, Bob Johnston sat beside him and spoke about a brother who couldn't survive freedom, about songs as the only moments of dignity. Johnny stared out at clouds that looked like unmarked graves. That night in Sacramento, the call came. The truth about Glenn's wife. Not cancer. Suicide. Police reports. Bruises documented. A story Glenn had needed to live with himself. Johnny sat alone afterward, replaying the tape. The song sounded different now, still beautiful, but sharp with need. He called the prison. "Tell me the truth," he said. A long silence. Then, "I killed her," Glenn whispered. "Not with my hands, with who I was." Dawn found Johnny on the balcony, cold air biting his skin. June joined him. "Have you decided?" He nodded. "My brother was a saint. I'm not. Glenn isn't either. But the song is clean." June offered him an out. "Sing it without Glenn." Johnny shook his head. "If I only sing for good people, I'll never sing again." The gates of the prison closed behind them with a sound that erased distance. At 8 in the morning, Folsom already smelled of disinfectant and sweat, metal warmed by California's sun. Every case was opened, every guitar dismantled, strings removed, drum heads tapped and retapped. An officer ran his fingers along the seams of Johnny's black jacket, as if expecting the fabric itself to confess. Captain Murphy waited near the entrance, posture rigid, eyes flat. "We know about the song," he said without greeting. "No material written by inmates. That's policy." Johnny didn't argue. "Sheriff Matthews approved it." Murphy's mouth tightened. "I handle security, not Matthews." By mid-morning, the mess hall looked less like a room and more like a threat. Microphones rose on thin stands. Bob Johnston adjusted reel-to-reel machines, hands precise, almost reverent. At 9:30, a technician froze and pointed under the low platform. A shank, crude, sharpened. Then another. Then two more, taped behind vents. The room emptied fast. Guards flooded in. Murphy's voice cut through the chaos. Cancel the show, evacuate, someone was planning something. For 40 minutes the air vibrated with boots and radios until Matthews arrived, breathless, furious. The knives traced back to a young guard whose brother had been killed by a former inmate. He'd wanted to stop the music. Matthews fired him on the spot. The concert stayed, but fear lingered like smoke. At 11:30, they led Johnny down a narrow corridor to isolation. Glenn's cell was barely wider than outstretched arms. He sat on the bunk, thinner than Johnny remembered, eyes bruised by sleeplessness. "You know," Glenn said quietly, "about my wife." Johnny nodded. "I'm not going to explain," Glenn went on. "I just want you to know why I wrote it." He spoke of a chapel sermon, forgiveness denied, a preacher who said music could go where mercy wouldn't. "That song wasn't hope," Glenn said. "It was a question." Back in the makeshift dressing room, 45 minutes before showtime, Johnny couldn't stop his hands from shaking. June buttoned his shirt for him, fingers steady where his weren't. Luther came in pale, voice hollow. His wife was taking the kids. He couldn't play. Marshall stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll cover it," he said, "or Johnny sings alone." At 12:50, the noise began. 2,000 men entering, chains clinking, voices crashing against concrete. Johnny peeked through the curtain and saw faces stacked like waves. In the front row sat Glenn, flanked by armed guards. Murphy leaned in close. "If he moves wrong, we shoot." 1 o'clock. Johnny walked out. The roar hit him full in the chest. He took the microphone. "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." A pause. "I'm here because I've lived in chains." The room went still. "We're starting with a song written by someone here today, Glenn Shirley. This is for you." Marshall's borrowed guitar rang uncertain, honest. Johnny's voice trembled, then found its spine. By the second verse, the room joined him, not words, but sound, a rising human hum. June cried behind the curtain. Johnston forgot the meters. When it ended, Johnny lied gently, said they'd learned it last night, made Glenn a miracle. Applause broke like thunder. One man shouted, "You're one of us!" Murphy moved. Johnny stopped him with a look and a sentence into the mic. "He's just saying hello." Authority blinked. The song had already crossed the line. Backstage at 3:30, Johnny felt emptied out, like a room after a storm. Sweat soaked through the black suit, his legs unsteady now that the noise had fallen away. June wrapped her arms around him and held on longer than usual. "You did it," she whispered, as if saying it softly might keep it true. Bob Johnston burst in waving tape boxes, eyes bright. "This isn't just good," he said. "This is history." The door opened without warning. Captain Murphy stepped inside, all edges and authority. "Glenn Shirley wants to see you. Alone." June shook her head immediately. Johnny didn't argue. He followed the guard down a short hall into a visitation room that smelled of bleach and old paper. Glenn sat cuffed at a metal table. His face glowed with something close to awe, and beneath it, something restless. "I've never felt that," he said. "Not once in my life." Then, almost casually, "I'm getting out. 8 months. After today, the board won't dare say no." "That's good," Johnny replied, choosing each word. "I want to work with you," Glenn said. "Write. Tour." "I've already got ideas." Johnny saw it then. The future Glenn had built in his head, complete and urgent. "Let's focus on you getting free," he said carefully. "Then we'll see." The room cooled. "Because of my wife," Glenn said. Not a question. "Because you need time," Johnny answered. Glenn leaned back, eyes sharp now. "If I leave here and don't become someone," he said quietly, "I'll kill myself. That's not a threat. It's math." Johnny felt the trap close. He asked for an address, promised to write. On the flight home that night, June slept against his shoulder. Johnny stared down at darkness stitched with distant lights. A flight attendant approached, shy. The pilot wanted an autograph for his son, locked up. She added, almost as an apology, that her brother was too. Johnny signed twice, understanding too late how far the song had traveled. The next morning, Clive Davis called. The album was moving fast, massive potential. Then the catch: lawyers, prison authorship, an offer, $500 to the institution, $50 to Glenn. "No," Johnny said. "Johnny?" "No album," Johnny replied, and hung up. He drove to his mother's house instead, told her everything. Carrie listened, hands folded, eyes distant. "I thought God took the wrong child," she said at last. "But Jack couldn't have done what you do. Still, some people belong to the dark." Don't confuse walking with saving. That night, Johnston played him a section of tape he hadn't noticed before. After the applause, Glenn's voice, half lost. "Now he's mine. He won't leave me." The headlines came anyway. Praise braided with doubt. Was Johnny rescuing others? Or himself? A letter arrived from Folsom. Glenn wrote the truth about his wife without mercy. He didn't ask forgiveness. He asked for a chance to become the man he'd pretended to be. Johnny signed the contract with a pen that shook only once. Added a clause by hand. 6 months. A chance. At 2 a.m. he mailed his reply. June waited in the doorway. "You sure?" she asked. "No," Johnny said, "but I'm done pretending certainty is the same as faith." The prison gate opened at 8 in the morning, heat already rising off the concrete. Glenn stepped out carrying a cardboard suitcase that looked older than he was. He stopped when he saw Johnny and June waiting by the car. Surprise crossed his face. Real. Unguarded. "You came," he said, as if he hadn't believed the idea all the way to freedom. The drive was noise and plans. Glenn talked fast, ideas tumbling over each other, songs he hadn't written yet, people he wanted to prove wrong. Johnny listened. June held Johnny's hand a little tighter than usual. They both felt the imbalance, like a floor that hadn't settled. Nashville didn't cure anything. Glenn wrote constantly, 2, 3 songs a week, raw, urgent. He also stole. Small things. Cash from a table, cigarettes. When confronted, he cried without denial. "Prison habits," he said. Johnny told him prison was over. Glenn shook his head. "Not the one I'm in." The album exploded anyway. At Folsom Prison went to #1. Greystone Chapel flooded the radio. Glenn's first royalty check was more money than he'd ever touched. He didn't know how to hold it. He gave it away too fast, bought gifts for strangers, as if afraid of what it meant to keep something. Touring made it worse. On stage, audiences loved the story. Off stage, Glenn drank until words fell apart. One night he forgot his own lyrics. Another, he punched walls until his hands split. "They don't see me," he shouted. "They see a trick." Johnny tried. He offered doctors, rest, distance. Glenn said Johnny had a home to fall back on. He had nothing but forward motion. The years folded in on themselves. A failed solo album, a bar fight, jail again, a year gone, a brief stretch of sobriety and faith, letters asking for help, checks sent quietly. June knew. She didn't stop him. On a May morning in 1978, the call came early. A trailer outside Los Angeles. One shot. No note. A radio left on, country station playing low. Johnny didn't cry. He listened to the old tape instead. The moment after the song, Glenn's breath caught in the microphone. June sat beside him. "It's not your fault," she said. "I know," Johnny answered. "And it isn't only his." 8 people stood at the grave. Johnny sang without instruments. His voice broke, and another man carried the line. It wasn't perfect. It was enough. Afterward, Glenn's sister handed Johnny a worn notebook. 47 songs. On the last page, one finished piece, written the day before he died. A thank you, without excuses. Johnny read it once, quietly, and closed the book. A week later, Bob asked if he wanted to record it. "No," Johnny said. "That one's for me." Then, after a pause, "But the rest, we'll let them live." Late that night, Johnny sat alone in the studio. The tape rolled. 2,000 voices rose. Glenn's voice, young, unbroken, held the center. Johnny saw his reflection in the glass and understood. The man on the tape would never age. He would always be that moment, when he was heard. Johnny turned off the lights. One small lamp stayed on over the recorder, steady in the dark.